My name is Ruth Calloway and I'm 37 years old. I am a senior archivist at a regional history museum in Exeter, Devon. I catalog things for a living. I assign provenance. I document origin and chain of custody, and I establish with precision what belongs to whom and why and when. I have spent 12 years doing this work and I am very good at it. 3 weeks ago, my mother threw my sister a birthday dinner at the house I grew up in and did not tell me. I found out on Sunday morning from a photograph my cousin posted on Facebook. 23 people in the garden of 14 Hensley Lane. My aunt, my cousin, my uncle, my sister's friends, my mother's book group. Tables set with the good linen. Bunting I recognized from our childhood birthdays. My sister Philippa in the center of it all, 35 and laughing. I stared at the photograph for approximately 1 minute. Then I closed Facebook and opened a blank document on my computer. I typed the date at the top. I typed the time. I wrote 2 sentences describing what I had seen. I saved the document as Family Log 2024 and closed my laptop. Then my grandmother telephoned. Not my mother's mother. My father's. Her name is Ruth Calloway and she is 81 years old and she lives in a stone cottage outside Crediton and she calls me perhaps 5 times a year and never for small talk. She said, "Ruth, I need to see you. Come alone on Wednesday. Don't tell your mother." What she had on her kitchen table when I arrived is the reason I am telling you this story now. Welcome. Drop a comment wherever you are in the world. Subscribe if you are new here. I read every one. Let me take you back to the beginning so that the end makes the sense it deserves to make. I should tell you who I am before I tell you what they did with what was mine. I am the eldest of 2 daughters. My sister Philippa is 3 years younger than me and she has always been, in the particular language our family spoke without ever saying it aloud, the one who needed more. Not more love. My mother loved us both. More management. More tending. Philippa had eczema as a child and then anxiety as a teenager and then a series of jobs that did not quite work out and then a series of flats that were too expensive for what she earned, and each of these things had generated in my mother a focused, responsive energy that I, with my scholarships and my early independence and my apparent contentment, had somehow not required in the same way. My mother had a word for what I was. Sorted. She said it warmly. She said it the way people say reliable about a car. As a compliment. As a form of permission to stop worrying. I had spent my 20s learning to be unsurprising. I had apparently been very good at it. My father, Graham, died of a heart attack 7 years ago on a Tuesday in November. He was 62. He had been a surveyor and a quiet man, and he had loved me in the specific way of men who express love through showing up at things, and he had shown up to everything. Every graduation, every new job, every flat move. After he died, I found in his desk drawer a folder containing printed copies of every email I had ever sent him marked with a yellow highlighter pen. He had been highlighting the good news. 7 years of my life in yellow. I have kept the folder. My grandfather on my father's side was Edward Calloway. He had built a company that manufactured specialist gauging instruments for the aerospace industry. 40 years of precise work that nobody outside the industry fully understood but that aerospace companies depended on. He sold the company when he was 68 and invested the proceeds conservatively in a portfolio he managed carefully until he died at 83. Dorothy, my grandmother, had been the bookkeeper for the company for 30 of those 40 years. She understood money in the specific way of someone who has counted it carefully for decades without spending it on anything unnecessary. My grandfather died 4 years before my father. His estate went through probate. There was a will drawn up by a solicitor named Philip Crane at a small firm in Exeter that my grandfather had used for 30 years. The will was clear and correctly filed. The main estate went to Dorothy. The house in Crediton, the investments, the personal effects. There was also a codicil. I did not know about the codicil for 3 years. Neither did my mother. Neither until last Wednesday did I. Let me tell you about my mother. Her name is Helen, and she is a woman who manages things with competence and conviction and who has, since my father died, been running the household at 14 Hensley Lane on the combination of her part-time librarian salary, the small life insurance payout, and whatever other resources had become available. I had not asked what other resources looked like. I had been sorted. I had my own income. I had a one-bedroom flat in Exeter that I had paid the deposit on myself when I was 26, using money I had saved from 2 years of part-time work alongside my master's degree. I had never asked my family for money, and it had not occurred to me to wonder whether my family had helped themselves to money that had been meant for me. The Sunday I found out about the party was the Sunday I had to revise that. I found the photograph on Facebook at 9 in the morning. I stared at it. I noted the bunting. I noted the number of people. I noted the absence of my name among the 51 people who had liked the post. I noted the date stamp. 3 days earlier. I closed the laptop. I opened the family log document. I had never made a family log document before that morning. The archivist in me had simply known it was time to start one. I rang my mother at 11. She answered briskly. "Ruth, love. How are you?" "Fine, Mum." "Was there a birthday dinner for Philippa this week?" A pause. "Not long." "Long enough." "Oh, sweetheart, it was so last minute. We literally pulled it together on Thursday." "I knew you'd be busy with work." I said, "It was on a Saturday." She said, "Well, yes." I said, "Philippa's friends came from Bristol." She said, "We had good weather for it." I said, "Mum, I am her sister." She said, "Ruth, please don't make this into a thing. You know how you are about crowds. I was thinking of you." I said, "Who told you that?" She said, "What?" I said, "Who told you I didn't want to be invited to my sister's birthday party?" Silence. Then, "You've always been self-contained." I said goodnight. I rang off at 11:14. I opened the family log and typed the call summary. I saved it with a timestamp. Then Dorothy rang. I had been thinking about Dorothy recently in the particular way you think about a person when you are beginning to understand that they know something you do not. She had called me in September, one of her 5 annual calls, and she had asked after my work and after my flat, and at the end she had said, "Ruth, is everything all right with the family, do you think?" I had said yes. She had been quiet for a moment, and then she had said, "I ask because I have been thinking about your grandfather's wishes and whether they have been attended to properly." I had said I imagined they had. She had said, "Yes." Just that. And she had rung off. I had written it in a notebook that evening, not the family log because I had not started it yet, just a personal notebook I kept. Dorothy. September. Grandfather's wishes. Tended to properly? I had not followed up. I had been sorted. I had had my own work to do. After the Facebook photograph and the phone call with my mother and the family log entry, Dorothy rang at 7:15 on Sunday evening. I picked up on the second ring. She said, "Ruth." I said, "Dorothy." She said, "I have been watching this family for 3 years and I have been quiet because your mother is a grieving woman and because your grandfather told me to be patient." "I have been patient enough." She said, "Come on Wednesday." "Alone. Don't tell your mother. Come for coffee at 9. I said, "Is it your health?" She said, "It is not my health. It is your grandfather's wishes." I should have said this 2 years ago. "Come at 9. She rang off. I sat at my kitchen table for a long time. I am an archivist. I know what it means when the provenance of something has been disrupted. I know what it sounds like when a chain of custody has been broken. I had heard it in Dorothy's voice in September and again now. I opened my laptop. I looked up the codicil register for the Devon probate office. I looked up Philip Crane at his firm in Exeter. I looked at the company's house records for my grandfather's old business. I did not find anything that answered my question. I had the right search terms but not yet the right document. Dorothy had the document. If you have ever been the person who catalogs things for other people while something of yours has been mislaid in plain sight, drop a comment. Subscribe if you haven't. Wednesday is 3 beats away, and what Dorothy sets on the table will change every number in this story. I drove to Crediton on Wednesday morning at 7:30. The road goes through the Exe Valley, following the river west past market towns and dairy farms and the particular October green of Devon in late autumn when the hedges are still full and the trees have just begun to turn. I had driven this road to visit my grandfather hundreds of times. I had driven it less often since his death. The absence of him made the road feel slightly different in a way I had not entirely resolved. Dorothy's cottage is at the end of a lane outside the village. Stone walls, a low gate, a garden she manages with the same precision she brought to the company accounts. She was at the gate when I turned in. Wool cardigan, garden boots, hair pinned up. She did not hug me at the gate. Dorothy was not a woman who hugged at gates. She said, "Come in." The kettle's just boiled. Kitchen table had 2 mugs on it already and a plate of shortbread she had made that morning. I could tell it was fresh because the kitchen smelled of warm butter. In the center of the table was a cardboard document box. Kind archivists use. Dark green with a white label on the end. Written in Dorothy's small, precise handwriting, Calloway. Edward. Estate. Supplementary. I sat down. She poured the tea. She did not sit immediately. She stood at the counter for a moment with both hands on the surface, her back to me, the way people stand when they are deciding the order of words they have prepared. Then she turned around and sat down, and she put both hands around her mug and looked at me over it, and she said, "Your grandfather made a codicil to his will in the January before he died." Philip Crane drew it up. It was witnessed by Philip and by me and by your grandfather's accountant, a man named Gordon Fitch, who is still practicing in Exeter. Codicil was not contested and it was not fraudulently suppressed. It was simply not filed. She paused. Your father was supposed to file it. He died before he did. Your mother knew it existed. She chose not to file it after your father died. She told me she would see to it. She did not see to it. I believed her for longer than I should have. I put down my shortbread. I looked at the document box. I said, "What does the codicil say?" She opened the box. Inside, a manila folder, a white envelope sealed with a sticker, and a set of documents clipped together with a binder clip. She took out the clipped documents and set them in front of me. The top sheet said, "Codicil to the last will and testament of Edward James Calloway. Dated January 14th. Philip Crane, LLP, Exeter." She said, "Read it through first. Then we'll talk." I read the way I read documents at work. Carefully. Linearly. Without skipping to the end. I, Edward James Calloway, of sound mind and memory, hereby supplement my last will and testament as follows. Codicil began with technical language establishing its relationship to the original will. Then it named what it was changing. Directed that a specific investment account, held at a private wealth management firm in Exeter, account number beginning 74, was to pass outside the main estate and directly to my eldest granddaughter Ruth Eleanor Calloway on the date she turned 35 or on the date of my death if I predeceased that date, whichever came first. My grandfather had died when I was 32. Codicil named the account. Named the balance as of January. £162,000. It named the purpose of the gift. He had written it himself in a clause Philip had clearly drafted from my grandfather's instructions. I direct this sum to Ruth because she has built her life from her own precision, and it is right that she should have the support of mine. She will know what to do with it. I read that sentence 3 times. I set the codicil down. I looked at Dorothy. She was watching me with the measured expression of a woman who has held something difficult for a long time and has finally handed it to the right person. I said, "What happened to the account?" She set her hands flat on the table. She said, After your grandfather died and your father died, your mother was the only person left who knew about the codicil and the account. Philip Crane had sent the original to your father to file. Your father kept it in his desk. I believe your mother found it when she sorted his desk after he died. She did not contact Philip. She did not file the codicil. The wealth management firm eventually moved the account under the general estate after 2 years of dormancy. Your mother was the executor of the general estate under the original will. She paused. She closed the account in March 2 years ago. I found out from Gordon Fitch, who had been the accountant and who sent me a note when he saw the closure because he knew what the account was. He knew it was yours. He had witnessed the codicil. I said, "Where did the money go?" She said, "Gordon traced it through the estate accounts before he wrote to me. Philippa's flat deposit in 2019. £112,000. Philippa had been in a flat in Bristol on a rolling tenancy she couldn't afford to buy into. Your mother bought her the flat outright. The remaining $50,000 was listed in the estate accounts as household and maintenance expenses across 4 years. She said, "I have Gordon's letter here, and Philip's records, and the estate accounts which I requested from the probate registry as a named beneficiary of the original will." She said, "I have had this folder for 6 weeks. I have been deciding how to give it to you." I held the codicil in both hands. I thought about the yellow highlighter folder in my father's desk. I thought about the road through the XE Valley and all the times I had driven it and all the times my grandfather had stood at the gate in his work trousers watching me arrive. I thought about the phrase, "She will know what to do with it." I thought about 12 years of archival work, of establishing provenance, of documenting origin and chain of custody. I thought about how long it had taken me to apply those skills in the direction of my own life. I set the codicil down carefully. I did not cry. I was 37 years old and I had spent 37 years being the daughter who did not need to, and I was not going to break that particular habit while sitting in my grandmother's kitchen with evidence in my hands. I said, "Did my father know? About the dormancy? About what was happening?" Dorothy said, "Your father died before he knew the codicil had not been filed. I believe he thought your mother had filed it. I believe he died thinking you had your grandfather's money." She said, "I am sorry for that. I am sorry I did not contact Philip myself. I kept thinking your father would do it. And then he was gone." She looked at her hands. "I should have called Philip the week he died. I did not. That is on me." I said, "Why did you call me now?" She said, "For the same reason I should have called 2 years ago and did not." She looked up. "I saw the photographs from your sister's birthday party on Sunday. I sat in this kitchen and I counted 23 people in your mother's garden and I looked for your face and it was not there. And I thought, Edward would not have stood for this. He left you that money because he could see what I should have been saying for 3 years. You have been invisible in this family and someone has been profiting from it." She paused. "I am done being quiet about it." I picked up the sealed white envelope. I looked at Dorothy. She nodded. I opened it. Inside was a letter in my grandfather's handwriting. 2 pages on the cream writing paper he used for everything. Same fountain pen he had used since the 1970s. His handwriting was small and level and entirely legible the way handwriting is when you have practiced precision for 40 years. He began, "Ruth, I have left you this money and this letter in the care of your grandmother and your father because I trust them both absolutely and because I know that your mother, although she loves you, has always found it easier to love the daughter who asks for things than the daughter who does not. I do not say this to wound anyone. I say it because it is true and because I am old enough and honest enough to write the true thing down." He wrote that he had watched me from the time I was small and that what he had seen was not self-sufficiency but something that had been made to look like it. He wrote that no child should have to earn visibility in their own family by performing independence. He wrote that he had built something in his life from careful work and careful numbers, and he wanted me to have the support of it because he knew I would not have asked for it and because I should not have had to ask. He wrote, "You will know what to do with it. You always have." He signed it with his full name and the date, and beneath that, in smaller letters, "With love that required no performance to earn." I read the letter twice. Then I folded it exactly on its original creases and put it back in the envelope. I looked at Dorothy. She said, "Gordon Fitch is still practicing. He will testify. Philip Crane has every document. Probate records are public. The estate accounts are traceable." She slid a piece of paper across the table. "This is the contact for a solicitor in Exeter. She specializes in contested estates and fiduciary breach. Her name is Caroline Webb. I have already spoken to her. She is expecting your call." I put the piece of paper in my bag. I put the codicil and the letter back in the folder. I put the folder back in the document box. I looked at Dorothy across the table, this 81-year-old woman in her wool cardigan who had held a folder for 6 weeks and had chosen this moment to hand it over because she had watched 23 people in a garden and not found my face among them. I said, "Thank you." She said, "Don't thank me. I should have done this 2 years ago." I said, "You did it now." She was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "Your grandfather chose well." I said, "He did." I drove back to Exeter on the EXE Valley Road with the document box on the passenger seat. I had buckled it in. It occurred to me to notice that I had done this. The archivist in me found it appropriate. You put a seatbelt on things that contain evidence. You protect the chain of custody. By the time I crossed back into Exeter, I had 3 sentences clear in my head. The first, I need a complete picture before I decide anything. The second, I am not going to tell my mother what I know until I know all of it. The third, I am not going to raise my voice once. I telephoned Caroline Webb from my flat at 12:40. She had a direct manner and no unnecessary warmth, which is what I needed. I told her the situation in the sequence I had established in my head on the drive. She listened without interrupting. When I finished, she said, "This is a fiduciary breach case. Codicil establishes the original intent. The estate accounts establish the diversion. The witness testimony from Philip Crane and Gordon Fitch establishes that your mother had knowledge of the codicil and chose not to file it." She paused. "The limitation period for breach of fiduciary duty begins from discovery. You discovered this today." I said, "Yes." She said, "Do you know what outcome you want?" I said, "I want the truth in a form that cannot be disputed. After that, I will think about the money." She said, "All right. Come in on Friday. Bring the document box." I went to work on Thursday. I catalogued 3 boxes of Victorian estate records for a family who had made their money in wool and had documented every transaction for 200 years. I found them peaceful in the way that honest records are peaceful because they contained nothing that needed hiding and therefore nothing that needed finding. I ate a sandwich at my desk. I ran 4 miles in the evening. I slept 7 hours. I did not contact my mother. I did not contact Philippa. I was not angry, not yet. I was the way I am before a significant piece of archival work. Focused. Methodical. Prepared to look at what is actually there. On Friday, I sat in Caroline Webb's office for 2 hours. She read the documents. She asked precise questions. She was particularly interested in the dormancy period and the closure of the account. She said, "Your mother had a legal obligation as executor to file all known testamentary instruments. Codicil was a known testamentary instrument. She had knowledge of it through your father's papers. Her decision not to file it and subsequently to close the account and direct the proceeds to your sister and to household expenses constitutes a clear breach of executorial duty." She looked at me over her glasses. "I also want you to know that Gordon Fitch has kept a copy of the codicil in his own files since he witnessed it. He sent it to Dorothy with his letter. It did not depend solely on your mother's honesty. Your grandfather was careful with his witnesses. I said, when do we proceed? She said, I would like to contact your mother's solicitor first as a matter of professional courtesy. I said, I would like to do this in person, in a room with the family present. She was quiet for a moment. She said, that is unusual. You understand that it is not legally required. We can proceed entirely through correspondence. I said, I know. I am an archivist. I understand the difference between a record that exists and a record that has been read by the people it concerns. I want them to read it. She looked at me for a moment. She said, I'll prepare everything you need. I sent the text to my mother on a Tuesday. I do need to come over soon. Family matter to discuss. I'd like Dad's sister Miriam there if she can make it. And Dorothy. I'll come on Sunday at 2. My mother called within the hour. Her voice had that particular quality she used when she was managing me. Ruth, love. Course, come any time. What is this about? Is everything all right? I said, I'll explain on Sunday. She said, is it about your father? Or the house? I said, Sunday at 2, Mum. She said, well, of course. I'll do a roast. Then, should Philippa come? I said, yes. Please have her there. Philippa texted me that evening. Hey, Ruthie. Mum says you're coming Sunday. Everything okay? Can we catch up beforehand? I did not answer. I put the phone face down and opened the document box and went through its contents for the third time, not because I needed to review them, but because I found documents calming in the way that people who work with them find them calming. They are patient. They do not change their story based on who is watching. Dorothy rang on Saturday afternoon. She said, I will be there at 1:45. I said, you don't have to come. She said, I witnessed the codicil. I am the most material person in this story after you. I am coming. I said, all right. She said, Ruth. I said, yes. She said, your grandfather knew you would handle this properly. He put it in writing. I said, I know. I had read the letter 4 times by then. I had it memorized in the specific way that archivists memorize documents, not word for word but by structure and by the location of each significant fact within it. Sunday. I dressed the way I dress for significant professional engagements. Dark trousers, a white shirt, the gray blazer I bought the year I passed my senior archivist's assessment. No jewelry except my father's watch, a plain steel thing he had worn every day for 20 years and which I had taken from his wrist at the hospital and worn on my own ever since. I made coffee. I ate toast. I put the document box on the kitchen table and checked the contents one more time. Codicil. My grandfather's letter. The estate accounts with Caroline's annotations. Gordon Fitch's letter to Dorothy countersigned. Philip Crane's confirmation of the codicil's existence and content. The land registry record for Philippa's Bristol flat. The family log I had been keeping since October, which I had printed and organized chronologically. And one more thing, the family log entry I had written the Sunday after the birthday party. The first entry. Date. Time. What I had seen. 2 sentences. The beginning of the record. Dorothy arrived at 1:45 in her good coat. I let her in. She looked at the document box on the table. She put her hand on the lid for a moment. She said, your grandfather was a very careful man. I said, I know. She said, he measured things in thousandths of an inch for 40 years and he measured this the same way. I said, yes. She said, let's go. I had not been to 14 Hensley Lane since April. The front garden was tidy in the way my mother kept everything tidy, the way you keep things when upkeep is both a value and a performance. My Aunt Miriam's car was in the drive. Philippa's small Fiat was at the curb. My mother's car in its usual place. I parked behind Dorothy's. My mother opened the door before I knocked. She was in the cashmere jumper I had given her for her birthday in February. She looked at Dorothy and then at the document box under my arm, and her face did something careful and then controlled again. Ruth, love. Dorothy. Come in. She said it warmly. The warmth was entirely present and entirely managed. The dining room. Philippa at the table with a glass of water, looking at her phone. She looked up when I came in and smiled with the slight uncertainty of someone who knows the atmosphere is different and has not yet identified why. Brett, her partner, was in the kitchen doorway. My Aunt Miriam sat at the table's far end with the watchful expression of a woman who has known something was wrong in this family for longer than she has known what it was. The roast was on the sideboard, untouched. A bread basket on the table. 4 glasses of water. I set the document box on the table. I set it in the center where there were no place settings. I did not sit down. Dorothy stood at the end of the table opposite my mother and set her handbag on the floor beside her and folded her hands. My mother said, "Ruth, whatever this is, we're a family." "We can," I said. "Mum, please sit down." She sat down. Miriam looked at the document box. She said quietly, "Is this about Edward?" I said, "It is about his codicil." The room went the way rooms go when a significant word has been used and at least one person in the room has been waiting to hear it. Philippa looked up from her phone. My mother's hands went to the table edge. I opened the box. I said, "In January the year before he died, Grandpa Edward made a codicil to his will. It was drawn up by Philip Crane, his solicitor for 30 years. It was witnessed by Dorothy, by Philip, and by Gordon Fitch, his accountant. 3 witnesses. All still living except Philip, whose firm still holds the records. The codicil directed that an investment account holding £162,000 was to pass directly to me on my 35th birthday or on his death, whichever came first. I took out the codicil. I set it in the center of the table. He died when I was 32. Philippa said, "What?" My mother said nothing. She looked at the codicil. She recognized the document. I could see from her face that she recognized it precisely because she had seen it before in my father's desk and had made a decision about it then. I said, "Dad was supposed to file it. He died before he did. When he died, Mum became the executor of the full estate. Codicil was in Dad's papers. She found it. I looked at my mother. You chose not to file it." My mother said, "Ruth." "Just my name," said in the voice she used when she was deciding what to offer next. I said, "Mum, I have the estate accounts." I took out the annotated summary. The investment account was moved under the general estate after 2 years of dormancy. You closed it in March 2 years ago. £112,000 went to the deposit on Philippa's flat in Bristol. The remaining $50,000 is listed as household and maintenance across 4 years. Philippa put down her glass. She said, "Mum, the flat." My mother said, "Philippa needed help." "You were fine." I said, "Tell me who told you I was fine." She looked at her hands. I said, "You had a legal obligation as executor to file all known testamentary instruments. Codicil was a known testamentary instrument. You had seen it. You chose not to file it. And then you used the money to buy your younger daughter a flat." Miriam said something under her breath. Brett had disappeared back into the kitchen. Philippa was looking at my mother with the expression of someone whose understanding of something they thought they knew has just been revised entirely. I took out my grandfather's letter. I said, "He also left me a letter. Dorothy kept it for 4 years. I unfolded it. I read it aloud in the voice I use when I read documents at work, even and unhurried, with full weight given to each sentence. I read the part about visible and invisible daughters. I read the part about building from careful work. I read the line, "You will know what to do with it. You always have." And I read the sign-off. "With love that required no performance to earn." The room was very quiet. My mother had her hands flat on the table and was looking at them. Philippa was crying quietly, the kind of crying that is not grief exactly but the specific distress of understanding something that complicates everything you thought you had been given. Dorothy spoke for the first time. She said from the end of the table, "I witnessed that document with my own hand. Gordon Fitch witnessed it. Philip Crane's firm holds the original. Helen, you knew the codicil existed and you chose not to file it, and then you spent what it contained. I should have intervened 2 years ago. I did not. That is the only part of this I am accountable for." She looked at my mother with the expression of a woman who has been polite for too long and has decided to stop. "Ruth is your daughter." Edward saw her clearly. "You should have done the same." My mother said nothing for a long time. Then she said, "I was trying to help Philippa. She was struggling. You were fine." She said the word fine in the particular way she had always said it about me, as though it were a fixed quality, as though it had never been a choice I made every morning in the absence of anything else being available. I said, "Mum, fine is not a reason. Fine is what you called me when you decided not to help me. And fine was what allowed you to spend what Grandpa left me on what you decided someone else needed more." My mother looked at the codicil. She looked at my grandfather's letter. She put one hand over her mouth. Philippa said, "Mum, did you actually know?" "All along." My mother did not answer her. Miriam said, "Carol." "Helen, for God's sake." My mother said very quietly, "I told myself she wouldn't notice, that she didn't need it, that she was doing so well." I said, "And now?" She said nothing. I said, "My solicitor will be in touch with your solicitor this week. I am not asking for anything beyond what Grandpa directed. The letter of what he directed and the accounting of what you did with it." I put the codicil and the letter back in the folder. I put the folder in the document box. I closed the lid. I lifted it. I looked at Philippa. I said, "I know you didn't know." "I believe that." She said, "I didn't. I swear I didn't." I said, "I know." I looked at my mother. I said, "I'll wait to hear from your solicitor." She said, "Ruth." I said, "Mom." She said, "I'm sorry." She said it quietly, looking at the table. It was the plainest thing she had said in an hour, and it landed accordingly. I said, "I know." I picked up the document box and walked out of the dining room and through the front door into the November afternoon. Dorothy was at the gate when I reached it. She had followed me out. She put her hand on my arm briefly. She said, "Drive carefully." I said, "I will." She said, "Gordon will testify. Philip's firm has everything." I said, "I know." She said, "Your grandfather built his whole life on measuring things correctly." She said, "So have you." I got in the car. The document box on the passenger seat. I buckled it in. I drove. The months that followed were not quick. That is the truth of contested estate matters. They are not quick and they are not clean, and anyone who tells you that getting the right outcome is a straight line has not done it. Caroline Webb filed in the probate court in November. Gordon Fitch submitted his statement. Dorothy submitted hers. Philip Crane's firm produced the original codicil and the correspondence from January. My mother retained a solicitor who wrote careful letters that suggested negotiation rather than contest, which is what people do when they know the documents are real and accurate and that contesting them would require lying in a courtroom. In February, the court accepted the codicil as valid. The executorial accounts were reviewed. The court ordered a settlement of £128,000, which was the traceable sum minus what the accountant could not directly attribute. My mother had 4 months to pay it from the estate. She sold the house at 14 Hensley Lane. She and Philippa had a conversation that I was not present for and will not speak about here because it belongs to them. Philippa kept the Bristol flat. The equity in the house was sufficient for the settlement and for my mother to put a deposit on a smaller place in the same neighborhood. These are the facts. I note them because they are the facts. Dorothy came to Exeter in April. I took the day off work and we drove out to the coast and walked along the cliff path at Dawlish Warren and had lunch at a pub where nobody knew either of us, and we talked about my grandfather for 2 hours. She told me things about him I had not known. The early years of the business. The year the company nearly failed and how he had rebuilt it. The way he had measured every tolerance by hand until the automated measuring came in, and he had spent 3 months learning the new equipment because he refused to become someone who had stopped learning. She said, "He always said the most important measurement was the one you took when you thought you already knew the answer." I said, "He put it in a codicil." She said, "Yes." We walked back along the cliff and the sea was gray and the light was October gold even though it was April and the hedges were full of new growth. Philippa telephoned in March. She asked if I would meet her for coffee. I said yes. We sat in a cafe in Exeter for 2 hours and she said most of what needed saying and I said what I was able to say, which was less than she said, which was all right. She had not known. I believed her. She had grown up being told that things came to her because she was loved, and she had not asked enough questions about where things came from, and there is an age at which you should start asking those questions, and she had reached it. She was starting to ask them. That was something. At the end she said, "Will we be okay, do you think?" I said, "I think so." "Over time." She said, "I would like that." I said, "So would I." We paid. We walked out into the March cold. She hugged me. I let her. My mother sent a card in May. It was a birthday card. She had forgotten in previous years. This year she had not forgotten. Inside she had written my name and then 3 sentences. "Ruth. I am trying to understand what I did. I know it will take time. Happy birthday." She had signed it Mum in the way she had always signed things, the way that had always been warm and enough and now was warm and complicated and still somehow enough. I put the card on my windowsill next to my father's yellow highlighter folder. 2 kinds of record. Both real. The document box lives on the top shelf of my home archiving unit, properly labeled next to my work files. The document is closed and stored correctly because that is how you treat primary source material. You do not display it as a trophy. You catalog it correctly and you store it in the right conditions and you know exactly where it is if you ever need it again. My grandfather's letter I keep separately, in the cedar folder my father gave me when I started my first archival job. It is the right container for it. The right provenance for the right document. I think about what he wrote. She will know what to do with it. You always have. He had written that before I was a senior archivist. Before I had built a career from knowing exactly what to do with things that needed to be found and preserved and returned to their rightful place. He had seen it coming. He had prepared accordingly. He had been, as Dorothy said, a very careful man. So am I. Took me 37 years to apply it in the right direction. But I got there. That is my story. A document box on a grandmother's kitchen table. Codicil that had been waiting 4 years for the person it named to come and collect it. And a family that discovered, rather later than it should have, that the daughter they had labeled sorted had been keeping a record all along. If this reminded you that your own provenance is worth establishing clearly, drop a comment, hit subscribe, and I will see you in the next one.